The number one question I get about growing my own potatoes is why do you even bother when they're so cheap in the supermarket? So we'll get into that briefly today, but it's also harvest day. So let's go dig out some potatoes and see what we got in our backyard suburban garden. A real harvest, okay? Let's go. I always approach this day with some level of trepidation because you never know with potatoes. You only find out once you get in there. You can't really see anything visible as far as whether or not your harvest is going to be successful. So I planted these on the 8th of February. It's late May. So it's been growing for a good 3.5 months or so. Now, there are a number of reasons why I grow my own potatoes, but one of the reasons is that they're actually relatively easy to grow. And especially, I grow them with zero pesticides and zero fertilizer as well. So, really, it's nothing more than just making sure that they're nice and moist and hilling them up every once in a while. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But I hope I can convince you that you can really grow potatoes very easily in your backyard. Even if you've got a very small space, you can grow them in containers and grow bags very, very easily. So behind me are my two potato beds. They are roughly 8 feet by 4 feet of planted space. And let me spin you around and show you what the potato plants look like right now. So you can see in this bed, they have mostly dried out. You want to harvest your potatoes once the plants start looking something like this, kind of yellowed out. I let them actually go a little bit too far. In some places, I can't even see the potato plants anymore. So I'm going to have to be very careful when I dig them up so I don't pierce too many of them because then they won't store. And in this bed, they're a little less further along because I planted these a couple of weeks after that one, but they're probably at the right stage that they should be harvested as well. And most of the potatoes in this bed are Yukon Golds. They're called gold potatoes that I got from Costco. And these potatoes are a combination of things that I just saved over the years. I don't even remember the names of them anymore. I had to step over here into the shade. Gosh, it's getting really hot these days. Let's get some of the suspense out of the way. I will go ahead and harvest a couple of plants just to show you what it looks like and then harvest the rest of them. But I'll also share with you some of the things that I did to prep the beds and how I planted the potatoes. And then I'll share with you some of the things that I did to maintain them and keep them free of pests during the growing season. And then finally, I actually want to share with you a very recent report that came out from Consumer Reports about the use of pesticides in our food and some of the findings that they had over 7 years of data. I was actually really surprised, actually shocked at some of the things that they highlighted. So stay tuned for that at the end of this video as well. Okay, the moment of truth. Let me first get my irrigation out of the way and then let's harvest our very first potato. Now, I like to use a pitchfork to dig out my potatoes. There's less chance of stabbing them that way. We'll see how it goes. Now, I'm no expert when it comes to growing potatoes, but I have been growing them for about 4 years, and every year I learn something new and also make some new mistakes. So if you've got any great potato growing tips, do leave them in the comments below. Looky, looky. Look at that, right off the bat, I've got 3 lovely little potatoes. Now, the thing about potatoes is that you always end up missing a few, and so you'll always have potatoes for the rest of your life if you plant potatoes once. Is that a benefit? Is that not a benefit? You decide. Let's continue digging. Now, quick little background on how I planted these potatoes. I planted them, like I said, in early February. And before I planted them, actually 2 months before I planted them, I covered the entire bed with cover crops, particularly mustard cover crops, because they are reputed to be able to kill nematodes in the soil, the bad nematodes in the soil. And so I grew those and I chopped and dropped them and I really worked them into the soil because that's what you're supposed to do. Right after they flower, a couple of weeks, you got to chop them down and then bury them into the soil and let it sit so that it can do its thing with the nematodes. And by way of fertility, I know I said I didn't use any fertilizers, but that was during the growing season. But before I planted in the bed, I did work in some steer manure. And then in each planting hole, as I planted the potatoes, I did put a handful of worm castings. And I also put some bone meal because, you know, this is a root crop. And so that phosphorus really helps with that underground crop development. These 5 from one small piece of potato, that's quite a return on investment. And as far as maintenance and ongoing management, the only thing that I really did was once the potato sprouts started growing actively, I would come regularly, at least once a week or so, and hill them up around each sprout with leaves. And I continued to do that at least 6 weeks into the growing season because they were growing really, really fast. So you don't want those green potatoes. Plus, I wanted to keep moisture in the soil. So those are the main reasons why I hill up my potatoes. There's all kinds of myths out there that, the more you hill, you develop potatoes all along the stem. That's not really true. The potatoes mostly develop right around where you plant that initial piece, maybe a little bit above, mostly below. So definitely hill your potatoes, but not for the reason of growing them along the stem, because then you will be disappointed. You guys, I am exhausted and sweating, and this is what the damage looks like after I was done with that bed. I turned off the camera because it was just taking a while, and I went and got my father-in-law to come and help me. So much for your no-till. But check out my harvest. Woohoo! I haven't weighed it, but this is easily, I don't know, I'm guessing 10 pounds of potatoes. And all I planted were about maybe a dozen plants, and I got that much of a harvest. You guys, 3.5 months. That's how much it took to get this. And I've got one more bed to do. That one, but I am just wiped out. I'll do that tomorrow. That's mostly Yukon Golds, but whew, a job well done, I'd say. So folks, do give this video a thumbs up if you're liking my harvest so far, and stay tuned because we're now going to be talking about why I grow my own potatoes and why I think you should as well. But first, we got to harvest that other bed. We'll do that tomorrow morning. See you then. So this bed here contains all my free potatoes. I grew potatoes in here last year, and this year they are all coming up on their own from the ones that I missed. Now I thought that I'd leave them in here because they'd make a nice ground cover for my tomato plants, but it looks like they are growing much faster. So I'm going to have to consider whether I'm going to pull them out or not, or just let them compete and see what happens. I have a feeling I'm going to do the latter. It's the next day and time to harvest my next batch of potatoes. And as far as pest management, the main pests that attacked my potatoes were two. Slugs and snails were the main pests, and they really ate a lot of the potato leaves to the point that I was like, should I put pesticides or not? And decided not to. The other is roly-polies. Believe it or not, I actually have a big problem with roly-polies. They're a little bit out of balance in my garden, and they love potato leaves, but they do not do as much damage as the slugs and the snails. So I just kind of let it be. Again, I like to experiment. I wanted to see how it went. And to my surprise, it didn't seem to affect the harvest that much. At least I don't think it did. Okay, I am done harvesting my second bed, and not really that thrilled with the harvest. Let me show you. We are honest on this channel, right? Yeah, that's all I got. So a little bit of a retrospective. Part of the reason could be because I just did not use the right variety of potato. Maybe these Costco Gold varieties that I planted are not exactly the kind that grows well in your backyard. So the bed that I planted yesterday was planted from seed potato that I had saved from the previous year, and they did really well. So yep, not going to buy the Costco Gold potatoes and plant those going forward. There were a couple more lessons that I learned. Planting in raised beds is a lot of effort to harvest. I was just exhausted, and I know I didn't get all the potatoes because there's going to be lots of sprouts growing very soon. And good thing, bad thing, I don't really know, but I would have rather harvested all my potatoes. So I'm going to be growing in grow bags going forward. Now I'll have to pay more attention to them because smaller container. I will have to add fertilizer, which I should have done anyways. Potatoes are very, very hungry feeders, and I should have added fertilizer a couple of times at least during the growing season. So some good lessons learned there. I will add fertilizer, I'll grow in grow bags, and I won't be growing Costco Gold potatoes anymore. So this is my overall harvest. It's over 25 pounds. I actually am really, really happy with it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it away in a dark place covered in my garage and let it cure for a couple of weeks. They're ready to eat right away, but curing them lets the skin harden up a little bit more, and they last a lot longer as a result. And these 25 pounds of potatoes, we're going to be eating them for a while. So coming right up is that Consumer Reports. I'm going to run it quickly through so you can see some of those that were highlighted in red. And if you want to learn how to grow cover crops, which I believe are one of the best things that you can do in the off season in your garden, I've created a detailed video on how I grow my cover crops. In fact, I've got an entire playlist dedicated to it. So I will leave a link to the video as well as to the playlist. So check it out when you get a chance. Enjoy the Consumer Reports findings coming up, and until next time, live green and love your greens. So let's check out this interesting report. Better. So let's check out this interesting report from Consumer Reports that was published on May 17th, 2024. So what the Consumer Reports scientists did was they analyzed 7 years worth of data from the USDA on some of the most commonly consumed fruits and vegetables, 59 of them to be exact. And they analyzed not just the fresh ones, but in some cases they also analyzed the frozen, the dried, the canned versions of them. And here's what they found. Now, they've classified this data from fruits and vegetables that have very low risk to those that have very high risk. And on the very high risk end, it could have implications to health, like hormonal disruption or cause neurological toxicity. Now, they've also broken the vegetables and fruits into conventionally grown versus organically grown. And under each of them, they've further broken it down into US grown versus imported. Now, the good news is that under the organic section, most of the products tested were well under the risk range. So yes, definitely choose organic whenever you can. So let's scroll through these. Yep, we've got blueberries, frozen as well as fresh, not unexpected. And bell peppers, that's an interesting one for me. I didn't know about that. And this is conventionally grown as well as imported. Interesting that imported blueberries and bell peppers actually are less toxic than the ones grown in the US. Scrolling a little further down, oh, don't buy imported celery or collard greens. Now, green beans are an interesting one. Green beans actually were found to contain something called acephate, which has been banned in US pesticides for almost 15 years, but the imported green beans do contain it. And the ones that are grown locally in the US, they are actually a high risk. So green beans are so easy to grow, you guys. Grow green beans. Hot peppers, kale, both moderate risk. And scrolling further down, ooh, look at that. We're at potatoes, and that is red for US grown as well as for imported. And yep, strawberries, frozen as well as fresh, very high risk if you get the imported kind. And even if you get it grown in the US, the risk is moderate to high for the conventionally grown. Yeah, definitely organic strawberries. And here's one that I was a little surprised about. Watermelon. That is high risk for US grown and actually a lower risk than US for imported. Yeah, again, that's one of those things you definitely want to get organic. So in conclusion, back to the subject of this video, potatoes are extremely high risk for all kinds of bad things to your health if you buy conventionally grown. Even the organically grown has a moderate risk because apparently there's cross-contamination since many of the organic varieties are handled in the same facility as the conventionally grown. So try growing your own potatoes, and if you can't grow your own potatoes, please, please, please buy organic, and even so, eat in moderation. So go check out that publication by Consumer Reports. I'll put a link in the description. And also check out my playlist on growing cover crops. I think you'll be amazed at how much they do for your soil. I'll see you next time then. Bye-bye.